Thank you everyone for joining us. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome to today's webinar on freshwater biodiversity monitoring. My name is Florence Mugi, and I work as the network manager with the Nature Conservancy. I will be the host and the moderator for today's webinar session. To start us off, please introduce yourselves in the chat, stating your name, organization, and the country you're joining us from. So I'll pause here for about 30 seconds as you introduce yourselves and as we let a few more people join us. Please introduce yourself in the chat. Great. Thank you for joining us. And in case you just joined us, we are introducing ourselves in the chat by stating the organization, the name, and also the country you're joining us from. At this point, I'll share my screen. Just to have a few housekeeping rules. So just as a reminder, all the presentations will be delivered in both English and Spanish. English for most of the speakers, but Spanish translation is available. So if you would like to use Spanish language, please hover over your screen, and at the bottom row, you will be able to see interpretation and select your preferred language. So it's either English or Spanish. Again, the meeting will be recorded, and this recording will be uploaded to our Resilient Watersheds Toolbox. And as a reminder, on the Toolbox link, it's on the Resources button. The Resources button is also at the bottom of your screen. And on that, you'll be able to see a few more resources for this webinar today. And we'll refer to them during the webinar. Lastly, all attendees are muted, and we are requesting that you type the questions in the Q&A button. And if possible, please include your name and organization so that we are able to make to your reference while asking the questions at the end of the session. So we'll try to have as many questions answered at the end of the webinar. We'll have a whole 20 minutes or more for Q&A, and we'll have all your questions answered. So we encourage that you type your questions in the Q&A button. So this is our agenda for today. We'll have Kari Vigasto, who will be going through two main reports on biodiversity. We'll then have 4 case studies from China, Amazon, and also Cape Town and Quito. And we are hoping that you will be able to engage with us through the whole time. So just to give a background, to quote a recent report by WWF that says that over the past 50 years, freshwater populations have fallen by 85%, with dangerous tipping points fast approaching. And with climate change and development intensifying, protecting these ecosystems is more urgent than ever. But fortunately, nature-based solutions provide some of the most effective and also cost-effective ways to safeguard freshwater systems and biodiversity they sustain. So today's interactive session, we will be exploring how conservation programs around the world are monitoring and assessing biodiversity outcomes, and we'll hear real-world examples from the people I just mentioned. And again, we are delighted to have you with us, and we encourage that you actively engage with us throughout the session. Now it's time to introduce our first speaker, who is Kari Vegasto. Kari is the Director of Water Security Science and Innovation for the Nature Conservancy's Global Water Program, strategically strengthening and advancing the science behind the Conservancy's source water protection and water scarcity strategies. And over the last 19 years, Kari has brought her technical skills and capacity building experience to dozens of watersheds around the world towards protecting water sources and also improving water use and management. Welcome, Kari.
Thank you, Florence. I'm really happy to be here amongst some fantastic panelists. I'm really excited about the agenda we have here today. So should I just go ahead and share my screen? Great.
Please.
Okay, I'm just going to take a few minutes to share about two exciting bodies of work that we've been involved in that are helping to support our understanding of freshwater biodiversity. So I'm going to go relatively quickly through this and happy to answer questions in the Q&A as we're going along, or afterwards, feel free to follow up with me about either of these projects. So I'm going to be covering two things today: our biodiversity benefit accounting work and our work exploring AI for freshwater biodiversity monitoring. So just to give you an introduction of what we're talking about with the biodiversity benefit accounting, or for short, we call it BIOBA. This is aimed at a corporate audience and those that are doing projects on the ground that are receiving funds from the private sector to help support them in the water stewardship space. And the aim of this BIOBA guidance is to really just provide general guidance on how to incorporate biodiversity considerations into their water stewardship work. It helps assess the multiple benefits of biodiversity conservation and restoration, helping to encourage a deeper focus on biodiversity in these corporate water stewardship efforts, and hopefully meeting the needs as more and more companies are looking to set biodiversity goals and emphasize the biodiversity outcomes of their water stewardship work. And all of this is aiming to link to other really important water stewardship programs and initiatives and builds on existing and emerging guidance. There's a lot going on in this biodiversity space in corporate water stewardship. So we're working in partnership with others that are in development for impact measurement and accounting for biodiversity. So just really quickly, we have a fantastic team from the CEO Water Mandate, Pacific Institute, Limnotech, which is a consulting company here in the US, from several colleagues from Nature Conservancy and Second Nature that are working together on this. And we receive funding from a number of companies that are interested in furthering their emphasis on biodiversity in their corporate water stewardship work. And we're supported by a wide variety of experts that serve in our expert advisory group, making sure we have that alignment with other work that's underway in this space and making sure what we're producing is scientifically credible. So just to give you a really quick insight into where this fits into this world of corporate water stewardship, which you may have varying experiences in this. For many years, there have been guidance on how to set goals around water quantity for companies under the volumetric water benefit accounting. In the last few years, another guide was developed to focus on water and sanitation benefits of water stewardship investments. And just last week, we published the water quality benefit accounting guidance, which is really exciting. And right now, we are nearing our first full draft of our biodiversity benefit accounting work, our BIOBA, which I'm talking to you about here today. And these are, as I mentioned, being produced in alignment with other frameworks and target setting initiatives that are out there in this space. So we think about the kinds of benefits from these projects by using this impact pathway. where we're looking going from the inputs, how the investments are made, to activities, outputs, outcomes, and impacts. And the focus of the Bioba Guide is in this output and outcome space. So in the biodiversity, from the biodiversity lens, we look at this baseline of what the status of biodiversity might be before a project is implemented. And then there's an investment in water stewardship, and though that investment is used to support water stewardship activities with biodiversity related interventions. And this produces outputs, which could be habitat change, really short-term presumptive conditions. And this can lead to outcomes, which is biodiversity change. And then finally, a longer term impact to environmental, social, economic value creation. So as I mentioned, our guide is focused in this output and outcome space, in part because it's already really complex to determine impacts on biodiversity in the outcome category, much less the impacts is a really complex it's really difficult to be able to do that within, especially these projects that we're talking about here. So some examples of what we mean by outputs, it could be number of hectares planted, volume of invasives cleared, or number of native trees planted. Under outcomes, we might look at habitat extent, where we have a clear definition of what we mean by high quality habitat. So we do look at habitat condition, and it could also be looking at species diversity or abundance and changes in those from the project. So I'll just wrap up just to give you an introduction to what the 7-step process is. And it's really focused on how to work through a project to ensure that we have intentional biodiversity outputs or outcomes, and that we're measuring those in the right way and communicating those in a really consistent way. So it moves from identifying those projects with potential biodiversity co-benefits, really importantly, working with local ecology experts to define those biodiversity objectives, developing a plan around that, implementing, collecting data, and then doing those estimates of outputs. If we have enough data and understanding of the system, getting to the outcomes, and then communicating those biodiversity benefits in a transparent way. So as I mentioned, this is underway. We expect to have the Bioba Guide finished near the end of the calendar year or the start of 2026. And we'll be happy to share that with you all when that's ready. But any questions that you have, feel free to, or interest in this, feel free to contact me. So I'm just going to quickly now move to this second project, which is an exploration of artificial intelligence for freshwater biodiversity monitoring. As you know, there are lots of gaps in our data sets and our understanding of our freshwater biodiversity in many places around the world. So we wanted to explore how AI might be able to be used to help more quickly analyze, fill gaps in data for an understanding of freshwater biodiversity and freshwater ecosystems. And we were really lucky to get some support from Google for this and to work closely with the University of Maryland's Center for Environmental Science, who were critical in helping us carry this forward. And what we did was we did some desktop research first on what is happening out there on AI for freshwater and AI for conservation biodiversity monitoring in general. What is already taking place and what are sort of the cutting edge of work in this space. We also identified experts that were working here through that desktop research and through personal connections that we had, conducted interviews with these researchers and practitioners, and sent out a survey for many others beyond the interviews that we did. Hosted a workshop with experts to test and refine our understanding of the categories of artificial intelligence and the approaches with the highest potential for the biodiversity monitoring. And then developed a set of case studies that illustrated that application of AI for freshwater biodiversity monitoring based on papers and work that were already out there. And so that is all captured in a report and a webinar that will be shared later this month. So that's really the gist of it, and I'm happy to answer questions about it. I know I'm probably tight on my time, but I'll just click through these slides really quickly just to give you a sneak peek on what we're talking about here. So we spent quite a bit of time on categorizing what types of artificial intelligence we might apply for freshwater biodiversity monitoring, including machine learning and deep learning. And there's lots of ways to categorize them, but we based it on what we saw most out there and how data are processed and analyzed. And within each of those categories, there's subcategories. For example, in machine learning, there's supervised and unsupervised, and you can see some of the types of approaches within each of those categories. And then, as I mentioned, we paired case studies to each of the subcategories. So you can start to see how AI is actually being applied and has already been applied to our assessments of ecosystems and biodiversity. For example, understanding populations of different kinds of fish across the Ozarks in the US, and looking at 31 freshwater fish species in order to inform management of these kinds of species. So there's different examples that we developed, and our intention here was just to understand what are the opportunities, what are we even talking about when we're talking about artificial intelligence for this biodiversity space, and what might be our recommendations going forward, and opportunities to use these approaches in helping us advance freshwater biodiversity understanding. So I'll just click through that, but feel free. I know I went through both of those really quickly. I want to leave time for the rest of the speakers here. We'll be talking about on the ground work. That's really exciting. But feel free to reach out to me directly anytime to learn more about either of these efforts. Thank you so much, Florence, and looking forward to hearing from the other speakers.
Thank you, Kari, for that great presentation. So we'll move to the next speaker, who is Wang Xuan. Wang is currently a conservation project officer at the Resilient Watersheds China Waterford, where she oversees the management of Qiandao Lake wetland project and leads the development and the design of large-scale resilient watersheds initiative in the River Delta region. Welcome, Sean.
Okay, thank you, Florence. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Of course, lovely. Okay, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. This is Xuan from China Water Fund. So today I'm pleased to share some of our work on biodiversity restoration and monitoring in the Qiandao Lake watershed located in Zhejiang, China. So this project is part of the broader Resilient Watershed project in Water Fund China, focusing on pilot demonstration, collaborative initiatives, and policy research. And our goal is to promote watershed protection and enhance ecological resilience through nature-based solution, education, and market-driven ecological compensation mechanism. And here are 3 scales of our watersheds where we conducted our work. So the large-scale watershed is about to start this year, and today I will mainly focus on the Qiandao Lake watershed. Based on the strategic value of the World Bank were introduced and established the World Bank Loan Project, and a joint watershed analysis by the World Bank and the Nature Conservancy identified key pollution risks. The basin faced significant stress from non-point source pollution, particularly from agricultural activities like excess total nitrogen and phosphorus, along with soil erosion, are major concerns for Qiandao Lake's water quality. So as you can see from the figures, the darker the color of the plot and river, the higher the total nitrogen and phosphorus pollution load of the plot and river. So controlling the total nitrogen and the total phosphorus in the incoming water is one of our main objectives. And currently we have 5 agricultural sites and 3 wetland project sites within this basin. And based on the watershed analysis we did, we are implementing nature-based solutions through 2 main strategies: source reduction through best agricultural management practices to prevent and control non-point source pollution, and process interception to purify pollution and enhance local biodiversity by restoring wetlands. So from source reduction, we identified 4 types of most widely grown crops: hickory, green tea, citrus, and rice, and conducted different practices for different crops. And the middle image in the second row shows the best management practices handbook for rice that we published. And besides the non-point source pollution, we face challenges such as rising water levels, loss of natural wetlands, and river channelization, which threaten floodplain functions and biodiversity. Then we used near natural wetland restoration at sub-watershed inlets to purify water and boost biodiversity to improve the resilience of this watershed. And our monitoring plan is built upon 3 core principles. So first, it must be scientific to ensure data reliability and representative to accurately reflect the ecosystem status, and cost-effective to guarantee the project's long-term sustainability. And guided by these principles, we have established clear objectives. Primarily, we aim to assess the baseline biodiversity and ecosystem health to understand the starting point. So this baseline is crucial to evaluate the effectiveness of our nature-based solutions interventions. And furthermore, a key focus is to monitor the presence and impact of invasive species. And ultimately, all collected data is designed to directly inform our adaptive management process and shape long-term conservation strategies. And to operationalize these goals, our monitoring comprises 2 key components. First, we track essential water quality parameters like total nitrogen, phosphorus, and ammonia, which are critical indicators of agricultural impact. And second, we conduct comprehensive biodiversity surveys. We focus on co-aquatic taxa, including fish, benzols, and attached algae, as they are direct indicators of water health. And we also optionally monitor groups like birds and amphibians, which provide a broader picture of watershed-wide ecological integrity. And our monitoring framework follows national technical guidelines and includes seasonal sampling at fixed points, inlet, transition zone, and outlet. So we use diversity indices such as Shannon Winner, Simpson, and PLO, and track species richness, abundance, biomass, and invasive species. And methods vary by group. Attached algae, benzols with grub simplest, fish via field capture and interviews, and plants use cojout and transect methods. So all data were compiled and analyzed in the laboratory. The dominant species of the fish community were determined using index of relative importance, which is calculated as follows. So here are some findings from 2 monitoring works, one in autumn 2024 and another in spring 2025. So in attached algae, Bacillorifida remains the most diverse phylum, and we observed a modest increase in diversity compared to 2024, with new records from Cretophyta and Euglonophyta, indicating improved microhabitat diversity. Dominant species included Sambela fancy and Corella, showing stable community composition in spring. Now, a total of 33 taxonomic units of benzols were identified in this assessment, belonging to 3 phyla, 6 classes, 13 orders, and 22 families. So the phylum Arthropida was the most diverse and accounting for 22 species, followed by Mollusca, like 8 species, and Annelida, like 6 species. And the Qiandao was a dominant benzols in both spring and autumn, showing high adaptability to seasonal hydrologic change. Its consistent presence indicates a high degree of seasonal stability and ecological resilience within the community structure. And other common species include Polypedilum and Cubicular flumina. So this group's resilience helps assess wetland health. And fish species richness was relatively lower in spring 2024 compared to 2025 compared to 24. But key species such as longfin topmost collet remained dominant, and the index of relative importance showed a more concentrated community structure, suggesting seasonal variability and indicating that the wetland waters maintained basic ecological suitability and continued to function as fish habitat under different seasonal conditions. An analysis of the cash bomb for wetland survey sets using the index of relative importance or as a metric identified the dominant species such as the longfin topmost cutler and followed by goby and yellowhead catfish. So compared to the autumn of 24, the number of dominant species decreased significantly in the spring, and the community structure showed a trend towards greater concentration. And although species richness was slightly lower in springs for aquatic plants, like biomass and plant cover increased significantly, and this indicates favorable spring conditions for growth and reflects the wetland's strong recovery capacity. Terrestrial plants community was simpler in spring 25 compared to autumn 24, with species distribution across sampling sites becoming more concentrated. And among the invasive species detected in this monitoring work, terrestrial plants accounted for the highest proportion, so followed by aquatic plants and finally aquatic animals. So a total of 11 species of terrestrial invasive plants were recorded, highlighting a need for focused management. So species such as Badens, Palosa, and Americia rusticana were noted as invasive. And based on the findings from our comprehensive monitoring, we can now summarize some lessons learned from the project. So our efforts have yielded significant successes, and the implementation of NBS wetlands have proven highly effective, not only in enhancing local biodiversity and ecosystem functions, but also by demonstrating that these restored areas serve as valuable carbon sinks and natural water purifiers. And furthermore, our multi-taxa monitoring approach has provided us with integrated, holistic insights into the ecological status of the watershed. And however, we also face clear invasive species continue to pose a persistent threat. And our data indicates that benthic communities exhibit concerningly low diversity with a declining trend. And another key issue is the need for improved management of sediment and ammonia levels in the wetland outflow. And to address these challenges and build on our success, we recommend a focused strategy. So this may include further enhancing both aquatic and terrestrial vegetation to strengthen ecosystem resilience. And furthermore, the expanding trend of invasive species requires our close attention. So we recommend strengthening management measures by integrating ecological restoration with active control methods to prevent their rapid expansion, so particularly during the high growth spring period. And in addition, the wetland ecosystem exhibits distinct seasonal variation between spring and autumn. Maintaining this biannual sampling frequency in future monitoring is crucial to fully understand the ecological succession process and their impact on biodiversity patterns. And the shifts in the composition and abundance of the fish community indicate that there is still room for improving hydrological connectivity and habitat structure. And future wetland management should therefore prioritize enhancing ecological connectivity and constructing ecological infrastructure that better supports species persistence and dispersal. So these steps are essential for upgrading the overall health and service functions of this ecosystem. So that's all from my side, and thank you all for listening.
Thank you, Sean, for sharing that with us. Now from hearing from the wetlands monitoring, we'll switch gears to freshwater fisheries management and monitoring in the Amazon, where we'll have Fernanda speak to us. So Fernanda is a fisheries scientist at the Nature Conservancy, working to protect Amazon freshwater systems through collaborative conservation. She partners with local communities, researchers, and policymakers to promote sustainable fisheries and preserve biodiversity across one of the world's most vital ecosystems. Welcome, Fernanda.
Thank you so much, Florence, for the invitation, and thank you all for joining us. I need to. I'm sharing my screen.
Yes, we can see your screen, however, not in full screen mode.
Okay. Now?
Perfect.
Okay. Okay. Thank you so much. Well, good evening, good afternoon, and good morning for everyone who joined us. Thank you, Florence, for the invitation for this webinar. I'm very happy to be here together with all these amazing women. And my presentation, it's a small piece from a larger project where we mapped also the management areas, not only monitoring areas in the Amazon, but here for a question of time and also for the subject related, I'm going to share only the mapping of monitoring initiatives. So my presentation here is the result of a project developed by TNC with the support from colleagues of a network called Amazon Waters Alliance. And here we will talk about how and where Amazonia fisheries are being monitored, what key challenges have emerged, and what practical lessons or recommendations we can take from this work. But before I dive into the monitoring information, it's important to understand the relationship between fisheries and biodiversity. So the most productive fishing areas in the world tend to be biodiversity hotspots. So for example, the Amazon basin ranks 60 in inland fisheries catch, and the Amazon, it's the most biodiverse freshwater region on the earth, and its multi-species fisheries reflect that richness. And this connection between biodiversity and fisheries imply a responsibility. If we want to conserve freshwater Amazonian biodiversity, we must pay attention close. We must pay close attention to fisheries management. So sustainable governance of Amazonian fisheries is essential not only to ensure food security for communities, but also to preserve aquatic species and different kinds of aquatic ecosystems there. And talking about freshwater biodiversity, Amazon has an incomparable diversity of freshwater fisheries. Studies estimate that around 200 different fish species are caught for consumption. Moreover, each region of the Amazon has a different species composition and fish practices. So these heterogeneous distributions, as you can see in this map, it presents a challenge. Different fishing gears, local markets, and fishing cultures mean that there is no single solution for management and monitoring across the Amazon. And given all this complexity, we raise the question, how are these very diverse fisheries in the Amazon being monitored? So to answer this question, we then defined the main objectives of this study. First, we investigate where fisheries monitoring initiatives already exist in the Amazon and document what methods and procedures each initiative uses. So we literally wanted to map where these initiatives are taking place and characterize these freshwater fisheries monitoring initiatives in detail. To achieve these objectives, we developed a standardized questionnaire and sent it via email to a list of different contacts, people from the government, NGO, university, fisheries associations, and so on. And in it, we asked for different information, like what are the objectives of this monitoring that you are developing? What are the data? Who are the data collectors? What is the methodology for the data collection? What types of fisheries data are collected? What is the sampling frequency? Are socioeconomic data collected? So we developed many of these kind of actions. And in summary, it was a process of gathering scattered information and systematizing it to provide a clear diagnosis of a state of fisheries monitoring in the Amazon. So what we found with this with this study. This slide shows a map of the Amazon indicating the location of the identified monitoring initiatives. In total, we could identify 60 freshwater fisheries monitoring initiatives across the Amazon basin. Of this total, approximately half of them are in Brazil and 33% in Peru, with the remainder in Bolivia, Colombia, and Ecuador. Brazil and Peru is standing out due to their higher importance for fish catch in the Amazon. Beyond geographic distribution, we identified some characteristics of these initiatives. That was a high community involvement, as 86% of the case, local communities members participate in the data collection. Often, local fishers act as monitors, recording the catch and fishing effort, sometimes with technical support. In some projects, universities or NGOs train residents. In any case, without community engagement, it would be impossible to collect data at such a scale in the Amazon. When you look for data collection frequency, about 45% of the projects collect data daily, meaning local monitors record catches every day at the fishing sites or landing points, showing a strong commitment to high-resolution data. About the duration of the activity, 43% of the initiatives have been operating continuously over 5 years, quantified as long-term monitoring. Besides these numbers, it's important to note that the total of 60 monitoring initiatives should be seen as conservative. It's likely that other initiatives are happening independently that we could capture, especially informal ones led by communities or local institutions. Therefore, this mapping is a starting point, and our intention is for it is to be continuously updating as new data emerge. And to make this more tangible, I would like to highlight a concrete example of a mapped monitoring initiative. I will show the case of the Mamoré River in the upper Madeira Basin, that it's a sub-basin in the Amazon. And this area is localized in the Bolivian-Brazil border. This initiative, led by a researcher, Paul Van Diem, and from an NGO in Bolivia, it's an incredible example of the importance of these monitoring projects, because especially in this project, fisheries data are being collected by riverine communities for over 28 years. This means the involvement of generation of fisheries where we have examples of father and son collecting data. And what I would like to highlight here is that they have data from 10 years before and 10 years after the construction of large dams in the Madeira River main stem. So they are collecting data using the same methodology during all this time, using the same protocols that allow them about comparability. And thanks to this monitoring data, both fisheries and researchers were able to identify significant impacts on the migration of and population dynamics of a dourado catfish, a key migratory species in the Amazon, known for having the longest exclusively freshwater migration in the world. This finding contributed to the species being listed on national and international red lists for conservation concern. For fisheries, many have begun using weather station data to support safer navigation, improve their communication skills, and some have shared that they have become better tour guides, integrating biological and the environmental knowledge into the storytelling. So this connection to science has not only enhanced their livelihood, but also deepened their motivation to protect the ecosystem they depend on. Moving to the identified challenges, we can show three major problems that we need to be addressed to improve fisheries monitoring effectiveness in the Amazon. One, it's when we overlap the monitoring data with management data, we see that out of 155 documented management initiatives, only 20 conduct systematic monitoring. So in other words, many communities having fishery rules, but few collect data to assess if these rules are working. Another challenge is about scale and standardization, as the mapped initiatives still operate quite independently. So each of these initiatives has its own spreadsheet, indicators, and different data, and no data shared repository. So there is no centralized database, and this make it hard to scale analysis to larger levels, like regional, national, or basin-wide. When we see the data ownership and sharing, it's a touching and sensitive point where we found restriction in data sharing. Some initiatives are funded by specific projects or led by agencies that don't make their data public. In other cases, communities may be hesitant to share fishing information without guarantees of benefits or feedback. This situation is understandable, but we need to move forward models where data flow more freely between science and management, always respecting credits for data collectors. And as we reach the end, I would like to highlight some key messages from this work. For the first one, it's clear that it's the backbone of Amazon fisheries monitoring is the local community. So valuing and strengthening these communities' initiatives should be a priority. Second, it's these monitoring initiatives are helping to differentiate the internal and external causes affecting fisheries, because many times fishers carry the burden about drops in fish catches or overfishing, but monitoring data integrated with other environmental data, we can develop a separate analysis and understand separate causes of these problems on fisheries. Third, and related to that, it's the monitoring. It's a valuable tool to anticipate and respond to extreme events. We are seeing increasingly frequent climate extreme in the Amazon, and this disturbance directly impact fisheries. So well-designed monitoring programs can detect early signs of these extreme events in aquatic ecosystems, serving as an alert system for communities and managers. And we also need to strengthen regional collaboration. The findings and challenges point to the need for public policies that support participatory monitoring and the creation of collaboration network. We need to standardize methods, share best practices, and unlock funding opportunities. And for the last, we need to invest in capacity and technology. Training tools and technological access to communities are critical to scale and sustain monitoring in the Amazon. So this is what I have to present, and I will be happy to answer any question that people raise. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Fernanda, for sharing. If you have questions, please type them in the Q&A tab, as well as any comments that you might have related to the last three speakers that we have had. So now we are moving to South Africa's case example, where Plisiwe will be sharing with us. Plisiwe joined TNC, or the Nature Conservancies in South Africa in 2022 in the role of monitoring and evaluation associate. She is responsible for setting up vegetation, monitoring plots and conducting vegetation surveys to record the impacts of invasive plants control operations on fibrosis recovery. She leads socioeconomic surveys, captures implementation and training data, and coordinates training interventions for the Greater Cape Town implementation teams. Welcome, Philisiwe.
Greetings, everyone. Florence, can you please confirm if my presentation is in slideshow?
Yes, we can see it. However, we can also see your notes. Maybe you can switch screen.
Okay. Is it
Perfect.
fine now? Okay. So greetings, everyone. So today I'll be taking you through the Greater Cape Town Water Fund Freshwater Biodiversity impacts. So the Greater Cape Town Water Fund is in South Africa, in the Cape Town region. So South Africa is a drought-prone country, and during 2015 to 2018, the city was faced with severe drought, where major dams that supplies the city with water had capacity recorded below 30%. So this meant people were gonna struggle to find water for drinking and cooking and other essential. So about 4 million people were standing in line for water. So this is mainly because of drought and also the increase in population, which continues to outstrip the water supply. Okay, I'm struggling to move to my next slide.
If you can find the cursor and maybe click and see if it works. If not, I can help you share the screen.
Okay, it's working. Thank you.
Go ahead.
Okay. So the future for water in the Cape Town region is uncertain due to rising temperatures and also increase in population. So the water scarcity problem is not only because of climate change. We also have an enemy in our catchments. Most of our catchments that supplies the city with water are highly invaded by invasive alien plants. And these plants, they use more water than our native species, and they affect the water flow and the water that reaches the dams. So the day zero, which is when the city almost ran out of water, it provoked some thoughts and also some solutions from the city where mitigations were necessary in order to address climate change and water scarcity. There were few solutions that were proposed. They're ranging from seawater desalination, wastewater reuse, as well as nature-based solution, which is clearing invasive alien plants in our catchments. And the clearing of invasives came as the cheaper option and where there was going to be a highest return on investment. So for the Greater Cape Town Water Fund, a business case, which was launched in 2018, there were priority catchments that were identified where there was going to be a highest return in investment by clearing invasives. So this is one of the strategy for the Greater Cape Town Water Fund to ensure that these catchments are cleared. As part of the Greater Cape Town Water Fund target, the aim is to clear 54,300 hectares by 2026, and progress to date, we have cleared about 74% of the target. And by clearing the 54,300 hectares, we aimed to replenish about 55 billion liters of water, which is equals to 2 months water supply for the Cape Town region. And to date, we are replenishing about 60% of the water benefits. So the Greater Cape Town Water Fund has a monitoring and evaluation framework, and we are looking at 5 thematic areas to track the impact on interventions. The first one, we are looking at management effectiveness. This helps us to apply adaptive management, and we also conduct socio-economic impact survey, where we track how the project is impacting livelihoods. We also look at water replenishment, just to quantify how much water is replenished by removing invasive alien plants. And we conduct partnership satisfaction survey. So I mentioned that we are working in priority catchment areas, and it's not only TNC that is delivering in those targets that I mentioned. We also have other implementation partners. And lastly, we are conducting terrestrial and freshwater biodiversity. So today I'll be focusing on freshwater biodiversity monitoring. So for this component of the monitoring and evaluation framework, these surveys are completed annually, and they are supported by the Freshwater Research Center, which is an appointed consultant that support us by conducting this survey. So during this time, they are tracking different variables, looking at electrofishing and FICNet survey, which helps to determine the fish population, size of the fish, as well as the species richness. And they also conduct invertebrate and amphibian survey, South African scoring system. Other people, they know it as SAS5. This helps to determine the river health by looking at the presence of bioindicator species in the rivers. And they also conduct the habitat suitability curve, just to understand what type of habitat is preferred by each species, because different species, some prefer like fast flowing rivers, others prefer shallow sections of the rivers, and others prefer deep section of the rivers. So I'll now be going through the key findings from the survey, just to highlighting what are the findings from the fish survey. So the region has about 24 endemic fish, and of those, 14 are listed as threatened with extinction on the IUCN Red List. And I would like to mention here that the numbers keep changing daily, because there are new species that are recorded regularly. And on the amphibians and vertebrate surveys, based on the results, it shows that the habitat are still near pristine, and the status of our river health, it's still in a good status. But there is a concern with the flow sensitive species, which are vulnerable to reduced summer base flow due to the presence of invasive alien plants, which reduces the river flow, especially during summers. So I'll just highlight here one of the species that really relies on the flowing rivers and fast flowing rivers, which is a Cape ghost frog. So this species currently is listed as least content in the IUCN status. And there is one thing important to note about this species, regardless of its status being least content, is that it spends about 2 years in the rivers before it fully develops into a frog. So for this species survival, the constant river flowing and the fast flowing is important. Otherwise, if the invasive alien plants are not removed, that means this status on the IUCN might change for this species and for other species as well that prefers fast flowing rivers. So through the removal of the invasive tree, more water reaches rivers and dams, and this results into improved water quality and quantity for the aquatic habitat structure. So I have a link here. I think Florence has shared this link on the resources, where you can look at the YouTube video that was done, and it has more details in our freshwater biodiversity monitoring. So with that, I'd like to say thank you, Ngiyabonga Ndolibuwa, as it's our last day for Heritage Month in South Africa. Thank you all for joining.
Thank you, Pilisiwe, for that great presentation. If you have questions for Pilisiwe, please type them in the Q&A or any comments regarding her presentation. And as she has mentioned, you can be able to see the video and also the monitoring dashboard on the resources tab. So now we are moving to the next speaker, who is Susanna. And just to mention a language change, Susanna will be presenting in Spanish. Therefore, if you have been listening to this webinar using the original audio, you can go to the interpretation tab and click English so that you are able to hear the translated version of Susanna's presentation. If you hear Susanna presenting in Spanish, that means that you are in the original audio, and please go to the interpretation and select English. Just pausing for a second to make sure that happens. Amazing. So Susanna is an expert in environmental conservation with more than 15 years of experience in participatory management of water conservation areas and protected areas. Since 2015, she has led diagnostic processes in areas of water importance and applying hydrosocial approach that integrates the ecological, social, and cultural dimensions of water. She currently serves as the coordinator of the Sustainable Water Conservation Areas Program, that is with Quito Waterford, and she works alongside a team of trained park rangers implementing community and also private conservation agreements that strengthen local governance of water resources. And since 2018, she has been in charge of comprehensive fire management in FONAC, also called Quito Waterford, areas of influence, leading the formation and operation of 5 community brigades and 1 specialized brigade. So Susanna, welcome.
Thank you so much. Hello, good afternoon, good evening for everybody who is attending this event today. Thank you so much for the invitation. I'm going to make a little introductory presentation of what is the Protection Fund for Water of Quito, Ecuador. Okay. We are the Water Protection Fund, which is the world's first water fund. It's a trust fund created in the year of 2000. We are responsible for protecting, recovering, and restoring moors, ecosystems that are the resources of water that are very important to supply the metropolitan district of Quito, Ecuador. Our strategic plan 2021 to 2025 is to manage the water-related areas of interest in the water-regulated microbasins for the metropolitan district of Quito. And the second one is positioning FONAC as the benchmark for the protection of water sources and ensuring their sustainability. How do we do this? Our mission is contribute to the protection and restoration of the watersheds that supply water to the district of Quito, incorporating a technical, social equity, and sustainability approach through different actions. We have, for example, several programs. We have 5 programs. One of them has a very strong team of protectors, which is basically what is called as forest protectors, but we call them differently here. We have 25 forest protections around our conservation areas and hydric importance sections. We have around 21,000 hectares of conservation, which is the property of FONAC or the public metropolitan enterprise of the drinkable water. We have a conservation agreement with public proprietaries, and we restore degraded moors, historically overused for stock. We also have a very strong program of ambience natural education program regarding especially the water areas. We also provide a research for making decisions. And I would also like to tell you that the scale in which I'm going to speak is a little bit smaller than my other partners in here. We are working in a few of around 770,000 hectares under the conservation of sustainable use regime. through different actions like National System of Protected Areas, Metropolitan System of Metropolitan Areas. But our main vision is to protect the water resources, especially the where we collect the from the water rest of Quito. As I was telling you, within our strategic planification is to manage the areas of water interest in the water regulations or microbasins for the DMQ. We have 6 conservation waters, or in which we cooperate with drinkable water, and we also work in importance areas, in hydric importance areas in Quito. A lot of these we work through conservation agreements. Within these ones, we have action lines, which is the management of conservation areas within the proper conservation areas is like to manage and control threats and to monitor changes. So within all the actions that we do for the conservation of water, since a few years ago, we have a very important challenge, which is to understand how the biodiversity works around water conservation, which is something that for most people might be logical, that through the conservation of water sources, we might be able to have a lot of answers in biodiversity. However, we have a few situations and challenges. We work with a team of forest guards in every area of conservation. We define monitoring routes, and our forest guards are basically the garrisons of our biodiversity. They were the ones explaining to us which is what we have. So basically, their work was to collect the evidence of how many sites we have regarding biodiversity and how the conservation actions start to impact the ecosystems of the areas where we're working on. I'm going to give you a little example. In 2020, we have a huge challenge. Since in one of the actions that we were performing during the first years in which we were working in these conservation areas was the reduction of a natural ambient sprays. In this map that you can see on the left side is the hydro conservation hydric in Antisana, one of the areas where we worked on, where we had a huge remnant of cow stock. The moor was a very fragile ecosystem, especially with all the pressure of the stock. So since 1802, there has been a huge impact with the coming of Humboldt. So you may understand the level of degradation in the area with all the livestock of sheep and cows, and around 9,000 livestock of cows. So when we acquired this area, there was a remnant of a huge remnant of livestock, and our guards worked for a few years in the removal of these livestock. However, we had an important situation here, which was what is the impact that this activity of reducing the pressure of the moor may have over other species, especially within the case, the condor. During a lot of years, basically what we had were evidences that the condor was feeding on livestock and on the corpses of livestock. So a lot of scientific groups were asking us what is going to be the future of this species if we remove the livestock, if you completely remove the livestock from this area. So we decided to progressively, with the support of local communities, and well, this concern stayed there. So basically what we did was to work with through an alliance with the community there. So about 3 years after removing the livestock, progressively, the condor started to feed from deer. So that gave us a guideline, basically explaining that the recovery of ecosystems might give us solutions to what is the food chain. So in the picture on the right, you can see some condors, around 10 of them, feeding for the first time in 22 of December 2021. Being fed from livestock, which is a good news, and it motivates us to take other actions regarding the monitoring of biodiversity. We did have an alliance. We have an alliance with the with the Condor Foundation, which contributed to the conservation and protection of biodiversity, promoting the sustainable use, research, and contribute to the recovery of endangered wildlife species all around the equator. What did we want with this new way of monitoring? What we want with biodiversity monitoring, basically we wanted to to contribute to knowledge the generation for decision making. So since 2021, we work in the following objectives. First of all, the generation of information for the make of decisions. Evaluate the abundance. Identify critical habitats for emblematic species like Andean bear, the puma, and the condor. Conduct ecological monitoring of carrion to understand the role and dynamics of vertebrate scavengers, primarily the Andean condor. This with the goal to understand what is the species that feed on carrion once we have them available in the ecosystem. For us, this is quite important because it helps us identify, for example, a lot of the exotic species that we have in the area, especially domestic animals, generally called like feral dogs. We can also have some domestic animals that we're taking care of and they become ferals. Also, we saw with a lot of worry that in the beginning of our activities of monitoring, the first scavenger animals were the dogs. And little by little, wild dogs. And little by little with restoration activities, this dynamic has changed. Also, implementing human-wildlife coexistence practices and vaccination control campaigns to reduce the impact of threats basically because of the threat of wild animals and the impact that this may have on people, and also with the campaigns of vaccination to reduce the impact of these exotic species or these wild animals and the threats that they may carry with them, and also support updated and georeference data for territorial planning and the design of conservation strategy by the FONAC. So as you can see in this table on the right, we have the registered species. We have an analysis of species that we do every year. And with a lot of enthusiasm, so we can say that every year, depending on the restoration activities that we perform or the level of pressure that we apply upon certain areas, we start to observe new and different species in our ecosystem, species like the puma, which already has as habitats a couple of important areas in here, which one is within Tisana and the other one is inside another area called the Alto Pit. What are the premises that we want to work for? Okay, first of all, the high and dense ecosystem, especially the paramos, guarantee the water supply for the metropolitan districts of the Quito and the capital of Ecuador, and the areas of water conservation and importance are key, but under various pressures. Water protection is closely related to the conservation of vulnerable species. How do we do this? Currently, the monitoring methodology uses its use of camera traps and strategic points. In 2024, we had 6,086 trap nights at 47 stations in 6 areas of water importance, 4 own areas and 2 areas of importance around Quito. Ecological monitoring of carrion. This approach allowed us to identify not only the species that use these resources, but also the intensity of their use, thus providing a more complete view of the role of carrion ecosystems dynamics, especially in areas where condors are recorded. And of course, the human-wildlife coexistence. Okay, I want to talk a little bit about 2 specific areas to understand a little bit the difference and the relationships of this. We work with the AC, the Antisana, since 2011. In 2011, they acquired an important area called Conservancy of Antisana, which was 700. This is next to a very important national park called also Antisana. And basically this ecosystem provides water to 400,000 people on the south of the city. It's a very important area. We have around 15 years of conservation for this area. And we have focused on the monitoring of a mammal in this year. In 2024, we have 774 trap nights, and we observe 8 mammal species, 6 native and 6 that were introduced. Like for example, like livestock, we still have a remainder of livestock of horse and cows. But there were 3 key stations for us. In the biodiversity of this area, we have a white-tailed deer and Andean fox, which were some of the most observed species. We have for the first time, the first record of an Andean bear since 2021, which for us is a very important species because it's a very big mammal. It's the only species of bear in South America. We have, for example, the interactions of predatory-prey interactions. and activity overlap between puma and deer. The care and monitoring, we observed 5 scavenger species, which were puma, fox, Andean condor, curriquingue, and buzzard. And this was the first year since 2020 that we didn't observe wild dogs within our area. And this is a very important situation because it basically means that the native species are little by little displacing the animals that don't belong to the ecosystem, especially the wild dogs, which are currently a huge problem, not only in the country but also worldwide. The Andean condor stood out as the primary consumer of ecological facilitator, for other species to be able to have this food. We can deduct, for example, that the prolonged process of restoration of this area allow for functional communities to exist, ensure ecological balance, and of course we have a healthy source of water for the district of Quito. On the right, you can see our condor. Sorry, our puma. Last year, we were able to collect evidence about the presence of a pregnant puma, which had a couple of cubs. And this year we observed another pregnant puma, which we don't know exactly how many cubs she had, but it means that the puma is finally adapting to this area as a permanent area habitat area. So it is very important for us because it helps us to identify and recognize the health status of our species. You can also see the population dynamics and the evidence of how many species we have in the area. On the other hand, I would like to introduce us to a different area. It's much special. This is Atacazo, which has around 400 hectares. It's close to the urban area, around 1 kilometer difference from the urban area. It is a relatively new area. We had almost over 650 trap nights, and we have very few species of interdependent events. Mostly for native mammals, which are the most common are the Andean rabbit and the Andean fox, which are basically present in several ecosystems, not necessarily conserved. In one station, we had 4 important species. And we were able to identify the presence of wild dogs. We saw the absence of several mammals. And during one carrying exercise, we had 4 species. We had the presence of the condor, which was registered for the first time in the area. The news in this series is this year for the first time, we were able to see an herbivore, which was a little deer. So this gives us a lot of hope. And also hopes that this series is gonna be able to be conserved in a better way. Also this year, our company bought an area that is going to be joined into this area of 2,000 hectares. However, our areas like Atacazo shows that the initial recovery from restoration of fauna is very limited because these are ecosystems or isolated habitats. Only is possible from the inhabitability of species. The fauna is limited to isolated habitats. Only the viability of species with restorations and connectivity processes is possible. So this allows us it basically tells us that we need to establish new strategies for monitoring and to monitor the health of our ecosystems, especially related to water sources. What have we learned from the species monitoring? Which is one of the main goals of our organization, which is to conserve and recover water sources. The topic of biodiversity has been an important challenge, but it basically tells us it's one of the main indicators, especially for us right now, something that is integrated within our indicators. It's been a great step for us to be able to have all this data. Why do we do this? What do we learn from this? Okay, so first, ecological restoration requires time and space. Areas like the Antisana shows that prolonged processes restore not only ecosystems, but entire food webs. For example, the areas for the deer, the pumas, and scavengers. Okay, so the deer eats the puma, and whatever is left of the puma, the condors will eat it. So it is important for this biodiversity things. Monitoring demonstrates the health of population like deer, foxes, pumas, and condors, allowing for an assessment of conservation, success, and ecosystem functionality. Small but still fragile patches like Atacazo contains fauna in isolated habitats, and connectivity is required to ensure long-term viability. So we are forced to find connectivity strategies and to find a long-term viability. Atacazo, I forgot to mention this, supplies of water of 120,000 people in Quito. So this is an extremely important area, but also it's an important ecosystem. There are human threats. For example, the contamination, domestic contamination, urban growth. These affect the fauna in the moors and the regulation of the hydric system. And finally, each species, we need to see in these last few years, each species plays an essential ecological role. The Paramo guards are key stakeholders. Their presence and vigilance contribute to the protection of the Paramo, of the moors, and reduce human impact. Sometimes it helps us also understand what is happening in our ecosystems. They allow us to control the species and strengthen the effectiveness of the conservation and restoration programs. That's all I wanted to say about the FNAC. I really want to thank you for the opportunity for speaking here today, and thank you so much for your presence today.
Thank you, Susanna, for that great presentation. I can see a lot of good responses on the chat. As my speakers come back to the main webinar to answer the questions that might be remaining or any question that you might have, this is a chance to ask your question on the Q&A. Most of them have already been answered. I can see a hand raised. I will open that in a minute. So I see very good, great presentation, Susanna. Great presentation, PDC way. So, Fernanda Kari, please, if you can come back to the main webinar. And Susanna, we have a question for you. If you can come back to the main webinar. Amazing. Okay. So, Susanna, there was a question for you. And this was from Alejandro Gomez. Can you expand a bit about the conservation agreements?
Ya. Nosotros trabajamos en la conservación de áreas a través de dos estrategias. La conservación de áreas
We work in
propias,
the
y la
conservation
otra son
strategies.
los
One
acuerdos de
is
conservación con
the proper
actores,
conservation areas, and the
especialmente
others are the
comunitarios y
conservation
privados.
agreements, especially with the
Básicamente son
private
alianzas
communities.
que nosotros hacemos para
These
la
are basically
conservación,
alliances that
son
we do for
alianzas a
the
largo
conservation.
plazo,
These are long-term
tienen
alliances.
diferentes
They have
mecanismos.
different
La intención de estos
mechanisms.
acuerdos es
The intention of
identificar
these
cuáles son las
agreements
áreas
is
de
to
conservación
identify what are the
importantes, ya sea para una
important
comunidad
conservation areas,
o
whether
para
for a
el Distrito
community
Metropolitano
or
de
for
Quito en general.
the Metropolitan District of
Se hace
Quito.
acercamientos previos con
We
comunidades o propietarios
we
privados.
do
Se
local
definen de
approaches with the
manera
community or with
participativa las
private
áreas que son importantes
proprietors,
para la
and we define the
conservación. También se definen las
areas that are
estrategias
important
con
for
las
the
cuales se va a
conservation, and we
conservar.
also define
Estas
the
pueden ser
strategies
a
that we
través
need
de
to implement to
alternativas
for
productivas,
conservation. This can be productive
soluciones
alternatives
basadas en la
or
naturaleza, y pues se hace una
nature-based
firma
solutions.
de voluntad.
And we
¿Sí?
also do a
Es
signature
básicamente la
of
voluntad
collect signatures
del
for willingness, which
propietario
is
o de la
basically the
comunidad
will
de conservar.
of
Y
the
el FONAC
proprietor
lo
of
que
the
hace
community to
es
conserve
aportar en
this.
algunas acciones
And what
para que
this
esta
does is to
conservación sea
contribute.
viable.
FONAC
Entonces
basically contributes
se
in
hace
some
una
actions for
zonificación
this
participativa,
process to be viable.
identificación de cambios que se
So
puede
there's a
requerir en alguna
participative
actividad
action
productiva,
and
las
identify
necesidades de
changes that can be
restauración
in a reductive
ecológica,
the
y
necessities
pues
for
se firma
ecological
un acuerdo que
restoration.
generalmente dura
And
entre
and we
5
sign an
y 10
agreement that
años,
usually lasts
y
between
pues
5
se
to
hace un
10
monitoreo
years.
constante de las
And with
acciones
the
que
constant
vamos
monitoring
realizando.
of the actions that we are
Tiene
performing.
una fuerte inversión económica
There's
también,
also strong economical
y una vez que
investment.
un acuerdo se firma, pasa
And once the agreement
automáticamente a una
gets
planificación
signed, it
operativa
automatically
y a
goes to
una
operational planification
planificación financiera también.
and to financial
Todos
planification.
los acuerdos de
All
conservación
these
tienen
agreements of our conservations
fuerte
have a very
compromiso de
strong
las dos partes,
commitment from both
y
sides.
muchas veces se hace también con el apoyo de
And very
gobiernos
often we
autónomos
also do it through
descentralizados, se hace también
the support of
con juntas de agua. Entonces tenemos
governments.
diferentes
We also do it
modelos
with the
de
water
alianzas para
meetings.
la
So we
conservación,
have several
que son
models
acuerdos,
for
cartas
conservation
compromiso,
alliance meetings, which is commitment
cartas de
letters,
cooperación.
agreements,
Entonces hay diferentes
cooperation
formas de
letters.
conservar
So there are
áreas de
several ways to
importancia, y vamos
to
viendo
conserve
cuáles se ajustan
areas of
más a la
importance.
realidad
And we want to see which
social
ones
y
adjust better to
territorial.
the social reality and territorial reality of each case.
Thank you, Susanna. There is a question for Sean. Sean, are you able to respond to the question on the Q&A? That is, could you please explain more about the market-driven mechanisms?
Okay, thanks for the questions. So our market-driven mechanism usually regards to the like how we can make our like cash flow to be more sustainable. So one of our measures is we produce some ecological products like agricultural products with a local village and the local township, and then we help the township to sell them, and the income and profits. A part of the profits will come back to our conservation projects, and like 80% of the profits will come to the village income, and we help them to generate like almost 10 million income for 1 year, and then we can also make our conservation products to be more sustainable. And besides this ecological products, right now we are using like water replenishment projects to make the sustainable cash flow. And regards to the biodiversity, we are now like exploring the biodiversity credits. And right now, like I have known like in Europe and maybe some other countries, they already have the guidelines and the keys, and they already like treat the biodiversity. But in China, like only some national guidelines are still in process. And so right now, like our projects, TNC China are exploring diversity credits from this year, and I hope this can be our major market-driven mechanisms in the future watershed projects.
Thank you, Sean. We have one person, Katie, who have raised hand. Katie, I will allow you to speak and give you 1 minute to ask your question. So if you can unmute. Katie Cecilia.
In this moment. Thank you very much. I think it's better to speak in Spanish, right? Or English is okay?
Please go ahead. Yes,
Yeah.
Spanish is fine.
Okay.
Okay.
I'm sorry. Lo siento. Quiero explicar en
I'm sorry.
español
I want to
un
explain
problema
something in
que
Spanish.
enfrentamos
There's a
en
problem
mi
that
ciudad. Yo
we're
soy de
facing
la
in my city.
Candelaria, del Cantón
I'm
Penite,
from La Candelaria,
en la provincia de
from Canton
Chimborazo.
Benite, in the
Desde el
province of Chimborazo.
2019 nos
Since
encontramos con la
2019,
sorpresa
we've been
de
facing
que gran
we
parte
face
del
the
páramo
surprise
ha
that
sido
a great part of
registrado a una sola
our
familia
moors
con
have been
escrituras
registered to a
legales.
single family with
Pero voy a
legal
darles una
writing and
explicación de cómo
papers
surge el
of
problema.
ownership. But I want to give an
La
explanation of
familia
what the
Moncayo ha
problem is here.
registrado escrituras sobre
So the
áreas de
Moncayo
páramo
family has
en el
registered
Cantón
the
Penite,
ownership of
alegando que
the
tiene
moors area in the
una
canton,
propiedad de alrededor de 7,000
claiming that they
hectáreas.
have a property of around
Y esto
7,000
es
hectares.
registrado en el registro de la
And this
propiedad,
is
o sea, ya
this is
están legales.
registered in the register of the property, so
Pero
it's completely
el
legal.
reclamo de muchos vecinos,
But the claim of a lot of
apoyado en
neighbors
peritajes
is that,
técnicos,
supported by
señalan que la
technical
extensión real
analysis,
de la propiedad es de
signal that
alrededor de
the real extension
700
of the
hectáreas.
property
Es
is
decir,
around
ellos están
700
ganando
hectares.
alrededor de más
So
de
they
6,000
are
hectáreas con esta nueva
they're
escritura.
basically owning more than
Lo
6,000
increíble
hectares
de esto es que
with this
hay
new
escrituras más
ownership
antiguas
paper.
que
The thing
demuestran
is
la
that there's
propiedad de
older
algunos
ownership
vecinos
papers
sobre este
that show
territorio,
the properties of
y
some
también
neighbors over this
hay
territory.
unas partes que han sido tomadas del
And there's
Parque
also some
Nacional
parts
de
that
la
have been
Biosfera
taken
Sangay.
over by the National Park
Si
of the
nosotros nos
Biosphere of Shanghai.
ubicamos geográficamente, nosotros
So
somos
if we look at
frontera
ourselves
con la
geographically,
Amazonía,
we are
de
border
manera
with
que
the
la
Amazon,
biodiversidad que tenemos ahí es muy
which means
rica
that
y
the
muy frágil.
biodiversity we have is
Si
very
bien
rich
es
and very
cierto,
fragile.
sí se ha
If it's
ocupado para
true that
actividades
it has been occupied
agropecuarias,
for
el
agropecuary
páramo,
activities,
también es cierto que hay una
the
gran
moors.
área que ha sido
Also, it's true that
protegida
there is a great area that
precisamente
has been
porque son
protected
fuentes
precisely
hídricas que tienen
because they are
impacto,
hydric
digamos, en todo
sources
lo que es la producción,
that
porque
have an important
está
impact in
destinada a
everything
riego,
related to
está
production
dedicada
because
a
it's been
abrevaderos, o
it's
sea,
been
para el uso
destined
de
for
animales
for
y también para
watering and the
consumo
use of
humano.
in feeding livestock and for human
Increíblemente
consumption.
fue registrado
But surprisingly, it was
sin haber
registered without
digamos, un
being,
antecedente legal,
how can I
simplemente fue
say,
una cosa entre
without
la
having a
familia y el
legal background.
registrador
It
de
was
la
just like an
propiedad.
agreement with the family
Y
and
se ha recibido apoyo
the renter
de
of the
algunas
property.
instituciones extranjeras para reclamar,
And they have
pero
received
desde el
some support of some
2019 que
foreign
inició el
agencies
reclamo
to claim it
hasta
back.
nuestra
But since
fecha no hay
2019,
una
since when
resolución
the
cuando
claim
se nota
started,
que hay
there
un
hasn't been a
fraude.
resolution through this date.
Ustedes,
Whenever
yo
we notice
sé, tal vez no
there's
se
a fraud.
ocupan de esto, pero sí
So
quería
I don't know
darles a conocer
if you
porque
take care of
ustedes
this, but I
están
just wanted to
formando parte de la
raise
conservación
awareness
de
on my
los páramos.
situation because you take part of the conservation of the moors. So I thought this is something that I might have to raise with you.
Thank you, Kitty, for that elaboration and the question. I don't have an answer for you. I'm not sure whether any of the speakers do, but we have your email and we can be able to reach out to you after the webinar. Susanna, did you want to respond?
Si quisiera tener tal vez
If I
rapidísimo,
wanted
nosotros
to, okay,
tuvimos un
just
problema
quickly.
muy parecido
Okay,
en
we
un
had a
área
very
de
similar issue
conservación, el Parque
in a
Nacional
conservation area
Antisana,
in the National Park
donde
Antisana,
una persona se hizo
where
propietario
there
de
was
un
this person
predio
who,
básicamente de
a
la
person
laguna de
basically
la
became the
Antisana,
owner of an
de un
area,
área muy
basically
grande,
the
y
lake of
esto fue a
Tisana in a
través
very large
del
area,
tema de
and
propiedad.
this
Lo que
was
se hizo es un
through
juicio, o sea, se
a
revisó
property
toda la
teams.
procedencia y
So
se
what we
realizó
had
un
was
juicio
there was a trial.
y se
We
pudo
checked
revertir
all the
se
historical
pudo
paperwork
revertir
and we
esta
were able to
situación. Entonces,
reverse
lo que te
the
podría
situation.
sugerir es que
So what I could advise
coincidas
you
con, por ejemplo,
is for you to talk to
el Sistema Nacional de Áreas Protegidas, el Parque
the
Nacional
National
Sangay,
System of
posiblemente
Protected Areas of
con
the
la
National
gente que
Park of
está
Sangay,
alrededor de las
probably
fuentes
with
de
the people
agua, que puede
who
ser la
work
empresa
around
de
the
agua
water
potable,
sources, who
y
can
pues
be the
intentar revisar
drinkable
cómo se
water
hizo este
company,
proceso, y el
and
proceso
maybe trying to
judicial que
see
no
how this
fue muy
process was
largo,
made. And
pero sí
judicial
tuvo
process
respuestas
was
muy buenas porque
the
se
judicial process was
revirtió
not very
esta
long, but had
propiedad
very
en
good
un corto
answers
plazo,
because
especialmente porque
this
estaba
situation
dentro
was
de un
reversed
parque
in a very
nacional.
short term,
Entonces te
especially because it
sugiero que
was
puedas
within a
hacer
national
esto
park. So I advise you to go
puede
and
ayudarte
contact
mucho.
basically contact the local authorities who are responsible for this.
Thank you, Susanna, and everyone for your questions, and also for the speakers for the answers. As we are running out of time, the remaining questions will be written down and shared together with this recording for the webinar today. So if you have more questions, please also share them and we'll be able to respond to you while sharing the webinar via written answers. So we have a few announcements. One is of a webinar that is happening tomorrow. That is the power of policy. This webinar will be tomorrow. Please register using the link on the resources. You can find the resources at the bottom row of your screens. Would also like to remind you about the network survey. This survey usually helps us improve our offerings by understanding what you need and also what your expertise and your geographic distribution is. And it also helps us create the calendar for the webinars for the next year. So please fill in our survey, annual survey. The link is also on the resources. And lastly, we have a case study competition that is investing in drought resilience. The submission has been extended to 10th of October, and winners will have their travel covered and be invited to present their cases at the official side event during the UNCCD in Panama later this year. So if you are working on drought resilience, you might want to submit your case studies. So lastly, I would like to request your participation in a very short poll as we close to help us plan a future webinar better on this topic. So when it comes to biodiversity, what areas spark your curiosity for the next webinar? You can use the QR code, you can scan it, or go to mentimeter.com and enter this code and share with us your feedback. So I'll just pause here for just 30 seconds. Scan the QR code or go to your browser and type menti.com and enter this code 2748-3148 and give us some feedback. I'll also share this link together with the recording, and you can be able to share more feedback with us. And just as a reminder, our toolbox for more resources and case studies on different conservation programs on this topic. And with that, we'll end it here. Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you to our speakers for the insightful presentations, and each one of you in the audience for active participation. Today we have seen how freshwater biodiversity is under immense pressure, but also how innovative monitoring and conservation approaches are helping safeguard these vital ecosystems. So we hope you found today's webinar discussions very valuable and inspiring, and a recording of this webinar alongside other resources will be shared with you. Thank you once again for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you in our next session. Thank you so much. And
Thank you
bye-bye,
very much.
everyone.
Bye.
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 Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
You.